Hello, welcome to a little Sonic Lab special. Yes, we finally got our Korg Minilogue. This is the synth that everybody is talking about. Came out just before NAMM this year. 4 voices of analog synth. Yes, it's hard to believe that something so much of it can be in such a little thing and at such a good price. Now, before I get into the review, I discovered a few things while I was setting up that I think might be little tips that might just persuade you or otherwise whether or not you'd be interested in such a thing. Of course, as ever, please just leave any questions below this video and we'll try and incorporate them into the final review as well. Anyway, let's get on. So the first thing about the Minilogue which makes it really different is it's got a lovely little, I think it's an AMOLED scope display. So you're playing a note, and you can see what the wave's doing. Introduce a more complex wave, and it gets jolly hypnotic. Introduce a bit of modulation. Well, there we go. Lovely stuff. In fact, this is actually one thing that makes the Minilogue completely separate from many things. A scope might seem a bit gimmicky, but I think Mark Doty had just pointed out in his first look at the oscillators that it actually is really useful because you go, oh, that's what a triangle wave looks like. This is why these waves. So educationally, certainly has a little bit going for it. But I bet you didn't know that you can also plug an external input into the Minilogue, and that will also display on the scope as well. I'll show you. So I'm going to enlist the help of my friend the Dreadbox Erebus, which is a lovely little Greek analog mono. You can see there'll be a link to the review that we've already done of this later in the show notes. So what I'm going to do, I've taken the output into the input. Now what I shall do, we'll just turn down the oscillators so there's nothing happening at all when I play the notes. Then we'll come to the display. I'm going to bring the Erebus up. You see I've got a pulse width wave, just to show you what's going on there. That is definitely this. Now the pulse width wave is displaying. Switch it to triangle. And there we have it. Very handy. Particularly if you're going to be doing sort of educational stuff, you want to see what waves look like, you just need to plug it into the audio input. You also need to press a key down at the same time to be able to see it. I wonder if it works for LFOs and things like that. Let's see. So I've taken the LFO output from the Erebus into the audio input of the Minilogue. I've got quite a fast LFO. As soon as I start bringing it down into kind of LFO territory, the wavelength is too long to be able to read properly. I mean, you can see that there's voltage changing, so I suppose it could have some use in the real world, but sadly, with most oscilloscopes, you are able to sort of say the range that you want it to display. This is obviously automatically doing it. I'm guessing might be based on some pitch detection. So unfortunately, not so much for control voltages. Never mind, let's move on. So we've also got the step sequencer, which is a major part of the Minilogue. And the Minilogue has a 16-step sequencer, which is pretty much the same as what you get on the Volcas. And on the Volcas, or certainly some of them, you can record motion sequences into them, which means you can record parameter moves that are then recorded into the sequencer. Now, what you may not know, or maybe you do, is that you can record just the motion. You don't have to record notes into it as well, so you can use the sequencer effectively as another modulation source. So I'll show you what I mean. So I've got this very simple triangle wave pad. Nothing particularly exciting about it, but let's bring in the analog delay, which is another nice little feature, probably about, so it sounds like about 600 or 700 milliseconds, that sort of thing. Not quite as noisy as the Volcas, but it's, you know, it's crunchy, shall we say. So, I like that sound. What happens if I modulate, if I move the time though? This is something that I quite like doing. I could just wobble the time a little bit and I get this kind of analog style chorus modulated delay sound. Now what if I wanted to record that into the motion sequencer? Let's try it. So I'm just going to basically hit record. I'm not going to play any notes. I'm just going to wobble this very slightly. and let's see how that sounds. That's nice, it's quite subtle, which for me is a godsend. So that's quite nice. So now we've got this kind of chorus just running off the step sequencer. Job's a good one, and obviously we can change the tempo so it has a little bit more flexibility. Now another thing I'm going to do is, I quite like the ability, I'll bring another wave in. Take this one down a bit. I can change the octave of one of the oscillators. I quite like the idea of maybe recording that as well. So let's just slow it down a bit to give me a chance to be able to do it. So I'm going to hit record. It's going to be fairly random, admittedly. Let's see what that sounds like. Maybe speed it up a bit. That's quite nice, adds a little extra bit of movement. Now, the one thing that we can do with this, if we look at, we go into edit mode here, we go into sequence edit, I've got various parameters on various different pages. Now this one is interesting, this is page 4, and I don't know if you can quite read that, but it basically says, it's got 4 lanes of possible motion sequence, and delay time and VCO1 octave is in there. So what I could do is I can clear those individually and then have another go, perhaps if I didn't like what it was doing. However, you can't maybe play some notes in there to start with and then play the motion sequence that you want to get compared to the riff, because you can't just delete the notes as far as I can tell, or at least there is a way to delete the notes. You have to just overwrite a load of rests on it. So it would have been nice if you had another lane in there for notes, just deleting just the note data, but it's quite handy. Another thing I'd like to do is maybe introduce some modulation. So I've got the LFO on a square wave modulating the cutoff frequency, which is a bit random, admittedly. Now, here's something cool. Go back into edit mode, go into program edit, and I think it's LFO is page 3. We've got BPM sync, key sync, and voice sync. BPM sync means it will sync to the tempo of the sequencer. So now, if I come out and play, just exit, you can see that I can set the beat divisions. I think that's 1/4, 1/3, 3/8. Take the depth down of that a little bit. So now I've got a tempo synced modulation going on. Now maybe what I'll do is record another bit of motion in there. Just try that. This is going to be a bit random. So let's see what that sounds like. Got a bit of ring mod going on in there. So again, that's 3 lanes of modulation. And again, if I come in and I just check my sequence edit mode and go to, I think it's 4, I've now got, I've got plenty. I've got ring mod, I've got DCO, I've got delay time, VCO1 octave, ring, and the VCO2 shape, which I must have knocked when I was recording that. So that gives me an additional 4 modulation sources. Pretty cool stuff, right? So one last thing, obviously we want to be able to synchronize the Minilogue, and the Minilogue has numerous ways you can do this. You've got the Volca sync in and out ports, which allow you to sync either Minilogues or other Volcas in the specific way that Volcas speak to each other, which is actually a little bit non-standard. So you can't use something like the Arturia BeatStep Pro to sync it at the moment because it's got a different kind of pulse clock, which is, like I say, fairly non-standard. If you, however, wanted to sync, say, the BeatStep Pro with the Minilogue, you could just send it MIDI and send it MIDI clock, the same from a DAW, syncs up, no problem. The Minilogue will just pick it up and then you can tempo sync. You can also set these sync divisions so you can double or half the sequencer playback rate. That's pretty nifty. I should also point out though, if you do want to sync it analogly, so via some kind of analog signal out of the Arturia, there is a way to do it, and this is the way that I found at least. Right, so I've got my BeatStep Pro hooked up here. Got a little sequence that's running on the error bus, just a simple pattern of 3. There we go, very simple. And then on the drum channel, I've got a count running on a 2-step on output 1. I've taken the output of the drum channel, output 1, and I'm bringing that into, I've got a little mixer here, which I'm just using to attenuate. So the trigger signal's coming in here, I'm attenuating it using this knob here. It's very, very straightforward. One other thing that's critical is you need to have, I found the gate length around about 14 or 15 on that particular step, and then it seems to work. Let me just play you, I'll stop this, I'll play you the sequence that I've got in my Minilogue. There's a bit of motion sequence, but it's just 3 basic notes. So now I'm just going to plug the sync cable into the sync input of the Minilogue. And I should, all things being good, be able to sync this all up. So let's just press go on here. Yep, and I've got a bit of I'm using some BPM LFO sync. Now, if I just mute my top sequence and show you what happens if I turn up the gate input, you can see it all starts to go very, very wrong. So it's quite critical to get the level of the trigger output coming into the sync in just right, otherwise it'll skip steps and get a bit confused. But you can do it, so that's something that's great. You just need some sort of attenuation because obviously the signal coming out of the BeatStep Pro is a bit hot. Now I should say, Arturia, the clocking and all of the other things that work with this are actually pretty standard. It's the problem is with the Volca sync because it uses an unusual format. So I have spoken to Arturia, and then I guess, you know, the KeyStep Pro, or the KeyStep, which is their new little keyboard, will talk Volca. So I'm guessing perhaps with some form of firmware update, maybe the BeatStep Pro in the future will be able to talk directly to Volca. That would be really great. So there we have it. That's my look at some of the nifty little features of the Korg Minilogue. I'm afraid it did turn out to be a little bit longer than I'd anticipated. So, but there is going to be a full review coming. And if you've got any questions you want answered, stick them in the comments below and I will try and get around to answering them when I do the full review. That's it for this time. Stay tuned and don't forget, subscribe to the channel and you'll know exactly when we upload the new stuff. That's it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.